The Carmel Music Society has put out this lovely brochure, and all of this information is also available on the website of the Carmel Music Society, carmelmusic.org. The website is in this, as I speak, is being transitioned into their upcoming season, but they do have a page that lists all the performers who have appeared on the stage of Sunset Center since 1927, and it is a very amazing lineup. Now, in 1932, they featured as soloist a very fine cellist who was at that time, or had just resigned from his position as principal cellist of the San Francisco Symphony. His name was Michel Peña. He was born in Amsterdam. He had come to this country in 1917, had been playing as a freelancer in New York and in Philadelphia, and Leopold Stokowski heard him and invited him to come and be the principal cellist of the Philadelphia Orchestra in 1920. Now, I grew up just north of Philadelphia, and I won't say I worship Stokowski to the extent that I have a statue of him on the dashboard of my car, but Stokowski's a very big name for us Philly denizens, and if Stokowski picked this guy as principal cellist of the Philly Orchestra back then, he's all right in my book. Then Maestro Hertz, who was the second conductor of the San Francisco Symphony, made Michel Peña an offer he couldn't refuse, and that brought Michel Peña to San Francisco. In 1932, he'd been out of the San Francisco Symphony for 2 years because he was a very avid chamber musician, and he was booked as a soloist in the fall of 1932 to appear now on stage of the Sunset School presented by the Carmel Music Society. He and Hazel and Dene hit it off really well. And so the following year, they brought back his string quartet, which was known as the Nia Ka Ni String Quartet, named after, it's an Indian name for a small mountain on the coast of Oregon, just below the Washington border. This group was based in Portland. They're a famous group in that area and very beloved. There was something about Michel Peña and Dene and Hazel that was the right chemistry. So they invited the Nia Ka Ni String Quartet to have a residency here in the summer of 1933. They sold tickets to the rehearsals of the string quartet. The string quartet got it in their mind that what they'd like to do was practice concerto literature. The violinists and the violists and the cellists wanted to have a chance to actually practice some literature, and Dene and Hazel said, why don't we bring some townspeople together who can play, and we'll have a little orchestra. And you can practice, Michel can conduct, we can teach the concerto literature accompaniment to the little orchestra, and we can sell tickets to the rehearsals. And this little orchestra that was formed under the direction of Michel Peña in 1933 is the root of the Monterey County Symphony Orchestra today. You can trace this organization under one name or another to the orchestra we have today. This is another thing that Dene and Hazel brought to us. Something I forgot to mention is that another interesting little tidbit is that the Carmel Music Society was the first nonprofit organization in the state of California. And also that on the way to putting together all these things, they decided that they needed a place to have these rehearsals, and they decided they needed a place to hang Hazel's paintings. And so Dene Dene and Hazel Watrous in 1928 opened the first art gallery in Carmel, California. That in itself is quite an accomplishment. In 1934, Michel Peña, after a year of conducting this little orchestra that was now doing performances on its own as part of the Carmel Music Society series and elsewhere, he apparently had other fish he wanted to fry. I think he was very, very busy in several chamber music groups that were touring nationally. And so he had a friend in San Francisco named Ernst Bacon. Ernst Bacon was born in Chicago. He came from, his father was sturdy northwestern plains stock. His mother was actually a countess from Vienna. And he had a very interesting upbringing. He was a very interesting man. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his first symphony in 1932. And no doubt the fact that he was a composer as well as a conductor must have appealed to Dean Dene. It's also worth noting that Ernst Bacon's sister, Maria, known as Maddie, was the founder of the San Francisco Boys Chorus and was herself a very, very beloved figure in the Bay Area music scene. So in 1934, Dene and Hazel hired Ernst Bacon to continue conducting the orchestra. And while Ernst was here, apparently he, with seeds sown by Michel Peña, put his head together with Hazel and Dene, and they decided to do a concert series in the summer of 1935. And part of that concert series was a 4-day festival of music by Johann Sebastian Bach. It was the 250th anniversary of Bach's birth. That is a very lucky coincidence for us, because we know that even as the 1935 very first Carmel Bach festival was actually being performed, they were already talking about the festival in 1936, which was going to be a Mozart festival. That's why I say it's lucky that they started with Bach in 1935. They're lucky that it was the 250th anniversary of Bach's birth, because it put Bach in everyone's mind. Why Bach? Bach is so hard to perform. It can sometimes be hard to listen to. This said by somebody who has spent his entire life performing the music of Bach. But these townspeople, and that's all it was in those days, it was all townspeople. These townspeople came together in the most amazing way to perform Bach's music that summer. And it caught on. And so by the fall, nobody was talking about Mozart anymore. They were only talking about Bach. Ernst Bacon moved on to take a teaching position in the Midwest, and he could no longer be part of this. And so in 1936, they brought in a fellow named Sasha Yakobinov. He was a violinist born in Russia, about whom I've been able to find out precious little. He was based in Philadelphia. He had a distinguished career as a soloist and then seems to have disappeared. I'm going to find out more about him, but I'm able to show you a photo tonight as part of our projections during the concert. Sasha Yakobinov conducted. He had actually played a solo in the first festival. He conducted the second festival. He was a soloist in the third festival in 1937, which was conducted by our old friend Michel Peña, who came back. And the night that Michel Peña played a cello solo, Sasha Yakobinov conducted for him. The amazing thing here is that Dene and Hazel surrounded themselves with really amazingly brilliant people. The man who conducted the first concert here had already won the Pulitzer Prize, and he was in his early 30s. The man who conducted the second festival was a renowned Russian violinist who was playing at Carnegie Hall in the Academy of Music in Philadelphia. The man who conducted the third festival and had helped to form it had been principal cellist with two great American symphony orchestras. These were brilliant, world-class musicians, and that seems to be indicative of the decisions that Hazel and Dene made all their lives. In 1938, as Peña again moved on, he was not willing to come here and be a full-time conductor every summer. For one thing, I think it must have been quite a lot of work, because until the mid-1950s, the only person paid at the Carmel Bach Festival was the conductor. Everyone else was a volunteer or a professional working pro bono. Think about that. Until Sándor Sálgo came in his second or third year, and they created a professional festival chorale and began paying soloists. In the early years, in the 30s and the 40s, the soloists came to town. They were given expenses and housing in private homes. And the local homeowners vied to have the vocal soloists as house guests rather than lowly third-chair violinists. But I want you to think about this, ladies and gentlemen, that Dean Dene and Hazel Watrous founded this festival as a community organization. And that is one of the coolest things that is endured here, is the community connection. even though now, and this is since 58, 59, we do have a professional corps, we have a professional orchestra, and we have a professional chorale. We still have a very, very important volunteer chorus. You will hear them tonight. They're very good. I make some jokes about the volunteer chorus then in the show. That does not apply to the volunteer chorus you're going to hear tonight. I won't give away it is the next conductor I'm about to mention who gave me the most memorable quote, which I'll relate to you in the course of the music this evening. But Peña was done. Ernst Bacon had moved on, Yakobinov had moved on, and they needed a new conductor. And so they hired a guy who had actually conducted one of the 4 concerts at the very first festival. But now he was a naturalized American citizen. He was born in Venice. In 1935, he was not yet naturalized, and there was some pressure among American organizations in the 30s to hire American artists. So both Gastone Osigli, who was about to become conductor, and Michel Peña were naturalized American citizens. Gastone Osigli was hired by Dene and Hazel to come in 1938. He was the conductor of the festival until 1949, at which point Hazel Watrous was diagnosed with a terminal illness that would take her life about 4 years later. And Hazel and Dene realized that they needed to turn over some of the control of the festival, and that's when Gastone Osigli became the music director. That is the first time that anybody other than Hazel and Dene had run the festival. From 1935 until 1950, the festival was produced by Dean Dene and Hazel Watrous, managing directors, and underneath them in the billing was the conductor. They were strong-willed, formidable women, thank God. They must have been amazing forces of nature. Gastone Osigli was a force of nature himself. He was famous for his tirades. He was a impetuous and temperamental Italian who alternately thrilled, cajoled, and badgered and intimidated the people of the town to produce the kind of music that he wanted. It must have been very, very dramatic music, and probably even for the most conservative of us today, his style of music making, I'm sure, would no longer be acceptable, knowing what we now know about Baroque music. But when you hear the music performed in the 1930s by people who were great musicians, you might quibble about whether or not it stands up to modern inspection. There is no doubt that what was going on back then was first-rate, and Osigli was a first-rate conductor. He conducted, as a matter of fact, the Los Angeles Federal Orchestra. At this time, as part of the Works Project Administration, there was a federal music project that underwrote music and orchestras and performances in many United States cities, including Monterey. And Osigli and Bacon were very involved in that. It was a hotbed of the arts. It's amazing what was going on in those days, and it was all connected. All these people knew each other, and they were all connected and interconnected. Gastone Osigli led the festival until his death in 1956, in March of 1956. Hazel Watrous had died 2 years before, and it fell to Dean Dene to pick the successor to Gastone Osigli. And she picked the most wonderful possible person she could have picked and immediately named him music director of the festival, and that, of course, was our friend Sándor Salgó. And that's where it starts to get into my heart, because he's the man who brought me here. He's the man who hired me and invited me to come to Carmel. And I will tell you that my heart gets bigger as I deliver this speech and the script upstairs in the concert, because Dean Dene picked Sándor. Sándor hired me, and that's why I'm here talking to you tonight. So this is a personal quest for me, and I think it's personal to any of us who are part of this community. These amazing women who, in the midst of all of this, in 1933, the fellow who owns the Golden Bough Theater goes to Europe for a year. He's going to close the theater down. They say, "Oh, no, you're not. You're going to lease it to us." And they produced 18 contemporary plays in one season, most of which had received their American premieres in English within the last 12 months. They also had time enough to renovate California's first theater over in Monterey, where the melodramas are presented. It was a ruin. They put it back together and in 1937 started presenting melodramas there. They're responsible for that too. There's so much else to this story, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm hoping that by next spring, I will have a little book that will honor these people and other names, Angie Machado, Ralph Lindsley, names that are just part of the lore here of this festival. They were real people. They were just as real and just as loving, and their hearts were just as in it as mine. And the tragedy of the arts somehow is that when they're gone, they're gone. I want to remember them. And I want that to be part of my thanks to this festival and our thanks to them. That's what I'm all about right now, and that's what I'm all about when I'm up on stage tonight. This has been a wonderful project for me, and along the way, funny things happen. I received a gift from my friend Allison. It was in my mailbox just on my way, and I want to put this on TV. She said that if I need to take a pause, she was going to give me an apostrophe. An apostrophe. So I now have this to say, I'm going to take a pause now. Maybe it's a comma, and I'll finish the statement upstairs. Thanks to Allison, and thanks to all of you. I'll see you up there. Thank you.